It was an especially brutal winter night when Zoya Spiridonova vanished without a trace. Snowstorms were common in that region of Russia, but this one felt different. Zoya, a young woman known for her calm and kindness, left her home with a simple purpose: to seek help for a minor problem in her village. However, as the storm intensified, the villagers began to worry about her absence. Hours passed and the snow covered everything, erasing any sign of footprints or the path she might have taken. Who could have imagined that this simple trip out of her home would mark the beginning of one of the strangest mysteries ever recorded? Days later, when the search finally began, the severe weather made movement difficult. But it was precisely at the most inhospitable point on the snow-covered road that the discovery was made. Zoya's body was found frozen, but in a completely unnatural way. Instead of lying down, as one would expect in cases of hypothermia, Zoya was standing, as if frozen in the middle of a step. What truly terrified the villagers and authorities, however, was the expression on her face, a mix of pure terror and something no one could explain. What did Zoya see before her final fate? That was the question hanging in the air. This mystery didn't end with the discovery of the body. Local authorities were baffled to find no signs of struggle, no visible injuries. It was as if the young woman had simply stopped, frozen in time and fear. Rumors began to circulate among the villagers as they tried to understand what could have led Zoya to that condition. What had terrified her so much? What was lurking in that deadly snowstorm? No one knew, but everyone felt that something much larger was behind this story. The discovery of Zoya Spiridonova's body did not bring peace to the small village. On the contrary, it only intensified the fear and curiosity among the residents. The condition in which Zoya was found defied logic and the experience of the village elders, who, despite being accustomed to the harsh winter, had never seen anything like this. Her eyes, frozen in an expression of sheer terror, seemed to have witnessed something unimaginable. The silence that surrounded the spot where her body was found was also disturbing, as even the typical sounds of the snowstorm could not be heard at that specific point. What could have happened at that exact moment? As the body was being removed from the scene, rumors began to spread like the cold wind. Some said that Zoya had been punished by ancient spirits that inhabited the frozen forests, while others believed that something more earthly, but equally terrifying, had pursued her. The stories intertwined, and soon the local imagination was consumed by visions of supernatural entities and invisible forces. There were those who swore they had seen shadows in the snow that very night, while others claimed that the wind carried strange voices. One thing everyone agreed on: this discovery was far from normal. The challenge now lay in the hands of the Soviet authorities, who, with the country already mired in difficult times, were doing everything they could to control the local panic. However, the lack of concrete clues about what really happened that night only fueled the most sinister theories. No one dared to walk the same path Zoya had taken, fearing that the same fate might await them. The search for answers, however, was only beginning, and the challenges ahead would be even stranger and darker than anyone could imagine. The Soviet authorities, known for their rigidity and disbelief in supernatural phenomena, were facing an unusual and challenging situation. The investigation into the death of Zoya Spiridonova began meticulously, but soon encountered a major obstacle. There was no evidence of a crime. With no signs of struggle, attack, or any injuries, Zoya's body seemed intact, except for its frozen state and her terrified expression. To the investigators, it was as if she had simply stopped, frozen in time, without a plausible explanation. As the days passed, the investigation team tried to find answers based on science. Hypothermia was one of the first hypotheses raised, but it didn't explain why Zoya was standing, as if caught mid-movement, or why her face bore an expression of panic. The answers they sought were not in the autopsies or the medical records, and this began to frustrate the investigators. Soviet Russia was a place of order, and not having a scientific explanation for such a bizarre occurrence only increased the pressure on the authorities. Meanwhile, local leaders feared that Zoya's case might become public and spark a wave of widespread panic. With no concrete leads, only the mystery remained, and it grew by the day, especially among the villagers who had already started forming their own theories. The authorities remained silent, but knew that without answers, the situation could spiral out of control. The case was becoming an enigma, and the lack of explanations only deepened the fear and discomfort, both in the village and in the minds of the investigators themselves. While the authorities investigated without success, the residents of the small village began to feel the disturbing effects of Zoya's death. The case dominated conversations in homes and markets, and the fear of something invisible and unknown spread like the biting cold of the snow. No one dared to leave their homes alone after nightfall, and even the bravest avoided walking near the spot where Zoya was found. There was something in the air, an oppressive feeling that danger still lurked, silent and unseen, in the shadows of the snowstorm. As days passed, the atmosphere in the village changed drastically. Previously, the harsh winter was just a part of daily life, but now every snowstorm was viewed with suspicion. The sounds of the wind seemed to whisper secrets, and the forests surrounding the village, once merely cold and empty, now seemed to harbor something more. The children, usually full of life, remained quiet and close to their families, as if they instinctively knew something was wrong. The fear was palpable, and the village, already isolated by the harsh winter, now seemed to be wrapped in an extra layer of darkness and mystery. This psychological impact on the residents began to affect everyone's behavior. People who were once sociable now avoided any contact, and silence took over the streets. The few visits that still occurred were to discuss dark theories about what might have happened to Zoya. Each story was more frightening than the last, and soon the legend of her mysterious death began to take on epic proportions. The fear that something evil was prowling around the village made the situation unbearable, and the authorities struggled to control the growing panic. As days passed and the absence of concrete answers persisted, theories about what really happened to Zoya Spiridonova began to circulate among the villagers. Rational explanations soon gave way to darker, more supernatural speculations. Some believed that Zoya had fallen victim to an ancient curse, one that punished those who dared to challenge the invisible forces of nature. Others swore she had crossed paths with wandering spirits, beings that roamed the snow in search of lost souls. With each new theory, the mystery deepened, and the fear grew alongside it. There were those who claimed to have seen shadows on the night Zoya disappeared, shapes that moved with the wind, indistinct yet undeniably present. "The snow hides more than our eyes can see," said the elders, who believed that Zoya's death was a sign that something dark was about to happen. These stories, fueled by the atmosphere of uncertainty and fear, quickly spread, and soon there wasn't a single person in the village who didn't have their own version of what had occurred. The terror of facing something invisible, something no one could understand, kept the village in a state of constant apprehension. The most superstitious villagers avoided even mentioning Zoya's name, fearing that they might attract the same fate that had befallen the young woman. To them, the snow and cold, once merely obstacles of daily life, had become elements loaded with danger and mystery. "The snow is no longer our friend," they said. With each new snowstorm, people withdrew further, fearing what might be hidden in the endless whiteness. What did Zoya see that night? What could have caused such fear in her final moments? These questions haunted everyone in the village, but no one was prepared for the answers. As the investigation progressed, supernatural theories began to gain even more traction. Among the most discussed possibilities by the villagers, one in particular stood out: the presence of beings beyond our world, supernatural entities that inhabited the snow. It was believed that Zoya Spiridonova might have encountered one of these malevolent spirits, which, according to local legends, roamed the most intense snowstorms, capturing the souls of the unwary who lost their way. The fact that her body was found standing, frozen, and with an expression of terror seemed to corroborate this idea. The fear that Zoya had fallen victim to something non-human became increasingly palpable. The stories of these spirits were not new. For generations, the villagers had heard tales of travelers who vanished without a trace during snowstorms, only to be found days later, dead under inexplicable circumstances. These beings were described as white shadows, invisible amidst the ice and storm, capable of draining the vitality from their victims and leaving them frozen forever. It was believed that Zoya had been touched by one of these entities, and her face, petrified in fear, was proof that she had seen something no human should ever see. The fact that she was the first victim in years revived ancient fears. The official investigation, of course, could not consider such possibilities. But to the villagers, science and reason offered no satisfactory answers. They saw the world through different eyes, eyes that had witnessed the destructive force of nature and now believed in something much greater. Zoya's disappearance was not just an inexplicable mystery. For many, it was a warning. Whatever was lurking in the snow was still there, waiting for another opportunity to strike. Meanwhile, the collective fear intensified, and few dared to leave their homes without looking over their shoulders, fearing that something might be watching them. Among the many theories that emerged, one of the most frightening was the legend of the deadly snow. Passed down from generation to generation, this story spoke of an ancient curse that haunted the frozen mountains of Russia. According to the legend, when the snow fell intensely, so dense that it seemed to cover the very sky, the deadly snow would appear, a phenomenon capable of draining the life from those who dared to cross its path. It was believed that this snow possessed a malevolent force, a vengeful spirit that punished those who got lost in its storms. For many villagers, Zoya was yet another victim of this mysterious force. The legend told that once within the deadly snow, victims were enveloped by a cold so intense that it froze even their souls. Their bodies became eternal prisoners, paralyzed in unusual positions as if they were ice statues. The most terrifying detail of this legend was that in the final seconds of life, the victims would see something horrific, something that transformed their facial expressions into masks of pure terror, a vision so frightening that no human could withstand it. Apparently, Zoya had been the latest to encounter this living snow, and, as the legend said, she had been left behind, frozen with her fear forever etched on her face. This story quickly gained traction, especially among the older villagers. For them, Zoya's death was proof that the deadly snow had returned, and its legend resurfaced with renewed intensity. Even the most skeptical began to wonder if there might be some truth to these tales, despite their basis in ancient myths. The mere fact that there were no rational explanations for what had happened only fueled the fear. People started avoiding the roads and forests, fearing they might be the next to cross paths with this invisible entity disguised as a storm. As the legends and fear spread, some experts began to investigate another possibility, the phenomenon of instant freezing. Scientists and doctors debated the chance that Zoya Spiridonova might have been the victim of a rare condition in which the human body freezes rapidly due to extreme exposure to cold. However, this theory did not fully explain the fact that she was found standing, as if frozen in the middle of a movement. Moreover, her face, marked by an expression of absolute terror, puzzled everyone who tried to rationalize the case. Instant freezing, as scientific as it might sound, did not explain the evident fear in her expression. Research into the phenomenon brought to light old cases of people who, after being caught in extreme storms, suffered sudden paralysis caused by a combination of hypothermia and panic. But how could Zoya have remained standing, frozen at that exact moment? The doctors were baffled. Even with Russia's extreme cold, the laws of physics and biology did not seem to apply to that scene. More than just a simple victim of the unforgiving winter, Zoya appeared to have seen something beyond, something that made her stop completely, as if time had frozen along with her body. This kept the mystery alive and further fueled the supernatural theories. And so, the mystery continued to grow, reaching ever greater proportions. The lack of scientific explanations only confirmed, for the more superstitious villagers, that something otherworldly was involved in Zoya's death. No analysis, no matter how detailed, seemed to provide a satisfactory answer to what had happened that night. The phenomenon of instant freezing was just one piece of a much darker puzzle. Increasingly, people feared that Zoya had been one of the first victims of something bigger and more dangerous, something that might be lurking in the next snowstorm. As the mystery surrounding Zoya Spiridonova's death deepened, the feeling that something evil lurked in the snow grew stronger. The inability of authorities and scientists to offer a convincing explanation only fueled the idea that supernatural forces were involved. Still, the case continued to be discussed among the villagers, and each new theory was more frightening than the last. The silence of the forests, the emptiness of the snow-covered roads, everything seemed to conspire to make the case even more enigmatic. With each new snowstorm, the fear that another person might disappear in the same way increased. The truth was that, by that point, no one believed Zoya's death was a simple accident. Time passed, but the questions remained unanswered. The most superstitious believed that Zoya was only the first of many victims. Would there be more cases like hers? Was the deadly snow or some other entity merely waiting to strike again? It was hard to predict what would happen next, but one thing was certain: the village would never be the same. Fear settled like an invisible shadow over everyone, while the authorities tried, in vain, to calm the growing anxiety. Before we continue with the story, if you're enjoying this narrative and want to keep following mysteries like this, consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. This helps us bring more dark and intriguing stories like that of Zoya Spiridonova. And if you'd like to support us even more, you can donate a coffee through the link in the pinned comment. Your support is what makes it possible for us to keep telling these stories that you love. Now, back to the story. The question that lingered in the air was, how far would this mystery go? With no concrete answers and fear spreading, the villagers knew they were living in a time of uncertainty. What had really happened that fateful night? Zoya's death was still an incomplete puzzle, and the worst part was that no one knew if the danger was truly over, or if this was just the beginning. The case of Zoya Spiridonova soon transcended the boundaries of the village and began to attract the attention of the Soviet media. Despite the government's efforts to maintain control over information, local newspapers and even some more daring reporters started to explore the mystery. The story of a young woman found frozen in such a bizarre manner quickly spread, attracting curiosity and further fueling public fascination with the case. What was supposed to be a discreet investigation turned into one of the most discussed topics in small publications, and over time, even central authorities began to worry about the growing attention. For the media, Zoya's mystery was irresistible. Even with the strict censorship imposed by the Soviet Union at the time, some stories managed to slip through, feeding the popular imagination. Journalists with limited access to information tried to craft their own theories, often based on rumors and local legends. The image of Zoya, frozen standing with an expression of terror, became a symbol of something no one could explain. Photos of the snowstorm, the forests surrounding the village, and the few available clues circulated in the newspapers, and the case gained new layers of mystery with each report. However, the media attention brought with it a series of problems. The exposure of the case only intensified the fear in the village and surrounding areas. People who had once viewed the case as a distant mystery now began to fear that something similar could happen in their own towns. The government, which was desperately trying to control the narrative, found itself in an uncomfortable position, and repression against any mention of the supernatural increased. Even so, the stories continued to circulate, keeping the fascination with what really happened to Zoya Spiridonova on that fateful night alive. As media coverage increased, the fear that had already settled over the villagers began to spread to other regions. The case of Zoya Spiridonova was no longer just a local mystery. It had become a source of widespread panic. In the more remote areas of Russia, where snowstorms were common, people began to fear that the same fate might befall them. Zoya's story transformed into a warning, and each new snowstorm brought with it an uncontrollable fear that something sinister was lurking. The cold wind that once merely annoyed now signaled danger, and the snow that once simply covered houses and roads seemed to carry an invisible weight. Conversations among the villagers, which had once attempted to rationalize what had occurred, were now dominated by widespread fear. Stories of spirits inhabiting the storms, once mere tales to frighten children, began to be taken seriously. Each new snowstorm was seen as a sign that the force that had taken Zoya was still nearby, waiting to strike again. No one knew exactly what had happened on that fateful night, but the feeling that something greater was lurking was undeniable. The fear became increasingly real, seeping into every aspect of the villagers' lives. Paranoia spread to neighboring villages, and even more distant towns began to be affected by the story. People avoided leaving their homes during snowstorms, roads became deserted, and the atmosphere of isolation grew ever more oppressive. The case of Zoya was no longer just an inexplicable mystery. It had become a shadow hanging over everyone. That small village in rural Russia, once insignificant, was now at the center of a national fear. And as the fear grew, an inevitable question arose. Was Zoya the only victim, or would others follow her tragic fate? As time passed, Zoya Spiridonova's case began to be linked to other mysterious disappearances in the region. Although most authorities insisted that these new disappearances had no direct connection to Zoya's case, the villagers believed otherwise. Rumors spread that other people had been found frozen in similarly strange circumstances in nearby villages. Each new report was shrouded in mystery, and the dark details seemed to echo the same frightening elements of Zoya's death. Stories of disappearances during snowstorms soon became a central topic of conversation throughout Russia. These new cases further fueled the supernatural theories. The most superstitious were convinced that Zoya had been the first victim of an invisible force that was now spreading. The idea that the deadly snow or some kind of entity was traversing the Russian mountains became part of the popular imagination, and as these new disappearances emerged, the villagers' fears deepened. No one was safe during a snowstorm. For many, the recent deaths were just the beginning of a series of catastrophic events yet to come. With each new case, the legends and terror intensified. It was difficult to distinguish between facts and rumors, but one thing was certain: people were becoming increasingly frightened. Some began to report sightings of shadows in the storms, while others claimed to hear voices in the wind, calling their names. It was as if Zoya's death had triggered a chain of supernatural events that no one knew how to stop. The feeling that something dark was on the horizon loomed over everyone, and the disappearances only reinforced the belief that the story was far from over. As fear spread through the affected regions, Soviet authorities faced a dilemma: how to manage the growing panic without allowing the case of Zoya Spiridonova to gain even more notoriety. Repression of the local media intensified, and any mention of the new disappearances was carefully monitored. The government wanted to control the narrative, insisting that these cases were merely isolated accidents, the result of Russia's harsh climatic conditions. However, the silence imposed by the authorities only heightened the sense that something much larger was being concealed. The attempt to suppress the case generated even more distrust. For the villagers and neighboring towns, the lack of official responses was a sign that the government was unwilling to reveal the truth. Conspiracy theories spread, with many believing that the authorities knew more than they were willing to admit. The mystery surrounding Zoya's death was no longer just a local issue. It had become a national taboo. Any attempt to discuss the case publicly was quickly repressed, which only increased people's interest in uncovering what had really happened. Over time, the official silence regarding Zoya's case and the other disappearances created a paradoxical effect. The more the government tried to keep the story out of newspapers and radios, the more the legends and rumors gained strength among the population. It was as if the very silence was confirmation that something much darker was at play. People began to whisper that the danger had not passed and that, at any moment, another snowstorm could bring with it another victim. What had started as a sinister mystery had become a living legend, and the government, inadvertently, had helped to perpetuate the fear. The mystery surrounding the death of Zoya Spiridonova was never solved. Years passed since that fateful winter, but the lack of answers continued to haunt the villagers and the investigators who worked on the case. Time, which usually helps unravel enigmas, only seemed to increase the complexity of this mystery. Despite all the scientific and technological advancements, the case remained an unsolvable puzzle. Zoya's frozen body, with its expression of sheer terror, still represented one of the most enigmatic events in recent Russian history. Each winter, as the snowstorms returned, the memory of Zoya grew stronger among the village's inhabitants. New generations, who did not live through the event, knew her story through tales and legends, yet even these accounts could not fill the gaps left by the lack of explanations. What really happened that night? How could someone die frozen, standing with such a horrific expression on their face, without any sign of violence or struggle? These questions remained unanswered, perpetuating the aura of mystery surrounding the case. Thus, the name Zoya Spiridonova became part of history as one of Russia's greatest unsolved mysteries. The Soviet government, for its part, never offered an official explanation, choosing to remain silent about the case. This, however, only contributed to Zoya's story being immortalized as a frightening legend, a dark reminder that the snow, as beautiful as it may seem, can hide terrible secrets. And so, decades later, the case remains alive in the memory of many, as an enigma that will never be unraveled. The case of Zoya Spiridonova not only became a legend among the villagers, but also began to influence Russian popular culture. The image of Zoya, frozen standing with an expression of terror, became a dark icon, symbolizing the unknown forces that can emerge from the depths of a snowstorm. Her story started being told as a cautionary tale, especially in regions where winter is most severe. To many, she represented the embodiment of mystery and the fragility of humanity in the face of nature's relentless powers. Books and films inspired by the case emerged over the years, exploring different versions of Zoya's story. Some productions focused on the supernatural aspect, suggesting that malevolent forces were behind her death. Others tried to find a scientific explanation, approaching the case as a rare and misunderstood phenomenon. One way or another, Zoya became part of Russian culture, her story retold in various forms, from theater plays to documentaries that delved into the unsolved mystery. Moreover, local folklore was deeply impacted as well. Tales of the deadly snow and other myths related to the intense cold spread and took on new forms. In many of these stories, Zoya was seen as the first victim in a series of paranormal events occurring during snowstorms. Russian popular culture absorbed her story, adapting it for different contexts and keeping the aura of mystery surrounding her death alive. Thus, Zoya Spiridonova became part of something larger, a tradition of stories that haunt and fascinate, passed down through generations. Over the years, new interpretations began to emerge regarding the mystery of Zoya Spiridonova, especially with scientific advancements and the growing interest in paranormal phenomena. Some modern researchers attempted to reopen the case, analyzing the few available pieces of evidence from a different perspective. Theories about extreme panic states, rare natural phenomena, and even hallucinations induced by severe cold were considered. Still, none of these explanations could fully account for what happened to Zoya that fateful night, particularly given her frozen posture and the expression of terror on her face. For science, Zoya's case remains an unusual phenomenon. Studies on human behavior in extreme cold conditions, such as instant freezing or paralysis due to hypothermia, were conducted in an attempt to find a plausible answer. Some of these theories suggest that Zoya might have entered a state of paralysis caused by intense fear, followed by the freezing of her body. However, none of these hypotheses satisfactorily explained the terrified expression on her face, which seemed to suggest that she witnessed something indescribable before succumbing to the cold. Alongside these scientific explanations, the paranormal field also found in Zoya's case a fascinating enigma. For those who study supernatural phenomena, her death was the result of an invisible presence or force that confronted her in the middle of the snowstorm. Theories about vengeful spirits, the deadly snow, and ancient entities continued to fuel people's imaginations. To this day, the mystery of Zoya Spiridonova's death remains one of Russia's most intriguing, with interpretations ranging from scientific to supernatural. The case remains unsolved, but its influence continues to provoke new discussions and keep alive the sense that there is still much left to discover. Despite all the years that have passed, the legacy of Zoya Spiridonova remains alive. The village where she was found was never the same, and her story echoes through the generations that followed. Zoya has not been forgotten. Her mysterious death has transformed into a symbol of something beyond human comprehension. The image of her body, frozen standing with a face marked by terror, continues to haunt all who hear the story. Zoya's legend is retold not just as an inexplicable tragedy, but as a warning about the hidden mysteries within snowstorms and places where rationality cannot reach. For many, Zoya represents more than just an unsolved enigma. She is a reminder that there are forces in nature and the supernatural that are still beyond our understanding. Her story has become part of local folklore, a warning to those who venture into snowstorms, reminding them that the cold can bring much more than physical danger. Over the decades, other mysteries have arisen in Russia, but none with the same dark and captivating aura as the death of Zoya Spiridonova. Her legend is passed down, increasingly wrapped in myths and speculation. Today, Zoya's name is mentioned with reverence and fear. Her legacy endures not only in stories and legends, but also in the collective imagination of all who encounter her case. For those living in the coldest regions, where snowstorms are constant, Zoya's case still serves as a warning. What happened to her could happen to anyone. Her tragic fate continues to inspire films, books, and theories, but above all, it keeps alive the mystery surrounding her death and what she truly saw in her final moments. And so, the enigma of Zoya Spiridonova remains immortal, far beyond her time. Thank you for facing the unknown with us. If this story gave you chills, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to our channel, and if you'd like, support us with a small coffee through the link in the pinned comment. Your help is essential for us to continue bringing these dark narratives. And if this story made you shiver, there's another one up here that will freeze your spine even more. Click and discover what lurks in the darkness. You won't want to miss it.